The second question is from Mark Ford. Mark, thank you.
If I had a sort of like community trust and everything, what stops sort of like maybe it's 5-10 years down the line if we go sort of like financial difficulties for it to be sort of like transferred to a privatisation company?
Okay, so what guarantees do the tenants have that the estate won't be wholly privatised in 5 or 10 years' time? Nick, do you want to pick that one up?
Well, the obvious answer is you yourselves. This is about empowerment, not privatisation, for my mind. This is, in effect, about defending social housing as opposed to just the principle of defending council housing. If we wish to get the money that we require to make the investment, to make the regeneration in Byker, then I think the trust is the only way forward. If you will be the board, you will be the voting representatives, it will be your decisions that will make the choices about where investment's spent. You'll be responsibility for the governance of the actual trust. So it's really a question I guess you're asking is, how does it fail? I don't see actually how it can fail, because you either have an opportunity of investing a significant multi-million pound package into Byker, which we all know is needed, or we sit and preserve council housing in Aspic. And we know what the current state of the economy is. There isn't a great deal coming towards us, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I think that it's about the ownership of the estate belonging to Byker residents taking a decision, so you'll be in charge of your own destiny. And I would suggest that Byker is an empowered and a bright and intelligent community, and it won't fail.
There are obviously quite a lot of concerns about the nature of the trust. It's quite a new concept. People have seen examples of other housing associations where rents are higher. Who's going to form the trust? How's it going to work? Can you just give us a bit of background on that?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say, Mark, just to perhaps underpin partly what Nick said, is that we haven't arrived at this decision lightly. We've spent probably the best part of a year and a half looking at what the trust would do over the next 30 years and very, very carefully looking at the costs, the income, and assessing all the risks and all of that. So this proposal is based on a very, very clear business plan, as we might describe it, that had looked at that very, very sharply indeed. That's important. We're not bringing something forward that we think is going to fail. We know it will succeed and has the robustness in the cash that will be in the system to avoid that happening. Ultimately, the trust is under the control of the residents. So you've got to vote now to make a decision about whether you move in that direction, and you'll have residents and tenants on the board. But beyond that point, for any big decision that's different to what you're deciding today, so in 5 or 10 years' time, if there are other choices, all residents would have a say on that, on any big decisions. The likelihood of privatisation is, in my view, zero. And anyway, in those circumstances, if that occurred, if we felt that the trust was getting in trouble, the Housing and Communities Agency, the government, would make sure that they stepped in, provided support to make sure it doesn't. But I don't believe it will be in trouble. I think it'll be extremely successful. And the finances in the capital investment initially and the revenue, the day-to-day money that's coming in, is very, very solid indeed. And it'll give a great place to live and then make those improvements. And the council does not want to privatise its homes. Certainly, we would be dead against that, and certainly I'm sure politicians would be, but the council administration would be as well. If you look at what the council has done previously, there were a range of choices many years ago about the creation of YHN and the Arm's Length Management Organisation, and there were choices also to effectively privatise or push these things out of the council's control altogether, or out of the community's control. We decided not to do that then, and we'll stay faithful to those principles as we go forward.
Can I just add to that? I mean, privatisation is not a word as far as I'm concerned with council or social housing, as Nick said or Barry said. As Barry said, when we set up YHN, there was a lot of, people disquiet about YHN being set up. Was it privatisation through the back door? But I think, in fairness, YHN have delivered. Yes, there's been criticism of some of the things they've done, some of the capital investment, but overall they've delivered. And they've delivered it in the completeness of having independent board members, tenant representatives on the board, and councillors. And that's exactly the way the trust will work, but on a smaller scale as far as I'm concerned. And if the word privatisation ever came out, well, my hand would be up against it. I make that very, very clear. And I'm sure Nick would, and Veronica, and most of the politicians in Newcastle now would certainly not vote in any way, shape or form to sell off the stock, as we didn't in the early 2000s when YHM was set up, because as Barry said, we could have set up or sold off to an RSL, registered social landlord, which chose not to go down that line, quite rightly as far as I'm concerned. And I would never ever vote in favour of that, I can assure you now, never. I would go to my grave squirming if that ever happened, believe me.
Thanks. I just want to ask Nick one more thing, because obviously it's something that worries a lot of people. What about the rights of tenants? Will they be safeguarded under the trust?
They'll be entirely safeguarded. There'll be a constitution created which will protect and be enshrined on record. The trust themselves would have to change, go through a whole democratic of a full vocal process, but ultimately you're comprehensively protected. That which you have now, you'll have in the future.
The trust, if you vote for it, if it comes into being, will be a registered provider of social housing. It will be registered with the national regulator, which at the moment is called the TSA, and in the future will be the Homes and Communities Agency. So to provide social housing, you have to be on that register. You cannot transfer to Joe Blogg's private landlord now or into the future. There's a register of providers of social housing, and that's registered with the national provider under their guidance, under their rules of regulation, and you can't transfer to anybody who isn't within that scheme. So you cannot go from where you are now to a private landlord.